Welcome to Chowder and Grits, the podcast for Virginia Tech sports. I'm Justin Cochiola, flying solo today. Tim's got some things going on, but we're going to recap the Pitt Panthers game. Hokies lose 45-29 on the road at Acrisure Stadium, no longer Hines. And then we're going to talk about Miami. It's Miami week. Obviously not as much excitement around that game, even though it's homecoming, Maroon effect, 40th matchup all time. But we're going to talk about it. Anytime playing Miami, it's a big deal, and it's a big game for the Hokies, especially as they go into the final stretch here. 6 more games left to the season. So, I think when we're looking at Virginia Tech right now, there's not, you're in the midst of a rebuild, right? So there's a lot of things that are going on that, wouldn't necessarily be great in normal seasons. So you're looking for those little victories. Virginia Tech right now is an average to below average football team that makes a lot of mistakes. And those mistakes, show themselves from like the explosive play rate they're giving up, penalties, miscues, things like that. Things like you should expect that any team is going to go through when there's a rebuild going on. So, if you look at this Pitt game, it was 45-29. There was some good, there was some bad, and there was some ugly as well. But let's get the bad out of the way first. I think, to nobody's surprise, the rushing defense is what really stood out as the worst of the worst in Saturday's game. And to be honest with you, it wasn't all bad, really. If you look at how the defense performed overall, it was actually pretty solid. Where they failed was the explosive plays. Israel Abanikanda sets a school record, 320 yards rushing. That breaks Tony Dorsett's school record of 306 yards that he set back in 1975. It was the first time a FBS Power 5 running back had 300 yards and 6 touchdowns in a game. The last guy to do that was Ricky Williams at Texas. If you recall, Ricky Williams won the Heisman Trophy that year. That was in 1998, and he did it against Rice. It wasn't against Virginia Tech. So, talking about that explosive play rate, 3 of Abanikanda's touchdowns were 29 yards or more. He had a 38-yarder, a 29-yarder, and an 80-yarder. He had 179 yards on 6 carries when you're looking at the 6 touchdowns runs he had. And again, he had 7 carries of 16 yards or more. It's really tough to win football games when that's happening. And I think, if you look at the rest of the sample size, he had 36 carries on the day. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to run the ball. 16 of those carries went for 2 yards or less. 8 were tackles for a loss. Which, if you look at that, I think Virginia Tech had 11 tackles for loss overall. I mean, that's typically a good day. You look at that in the stat sheet, you're like, well, Virginia Tech probably won that game, or they held Pitt in check. However, on the other 20 carries, not so good. So, coming into the game, Tech ranked 98th overall in the country, allowing 2.2 yards before contact. Against Pitt, it was 5.57. So you can see some of the issues they were having there defensively against the run. The good, I kind of alluded to it there, half jokingly. I don't know if we have any PFF followers here, but PFF is a grader, we should say, of plays and players. And a lot of times when you see those grades, they don't match up necessarily with the statistics that you'll see in a box score. But I think the way you should approach it is you can't read a game by the box score and determine how a team played. And it's the same for a grade. So if Grant Wells throws a pass to Caleb Smith and it's caught by Caleb Smith, but the way he caught it was it went off of the defender's hands. It was thrown straight to the defender bobbles it, but Caleb Smith catches the ball. That's going to be a bad grade for the quarterback, but it could show up as a big gain in the box score. Virginia Tech's rushing performance, their rushing grade defensively was the highest it's been all season, which kind of goes back to that 16 carries of 2 yards or less with 8 tackles for a loss. They've got to limit the explosive play rate. So, takeaway, they were playing better for the vast majority of time, but they're living and dying by that big play. Another bad was tackling. This was the Hokies' worst performance of the year from a tackling standpoint. They also graded out poorly from a pass rushing standpoint. They had, from a tackling standpoint, 11 missed tackles overall. 8 of those were against the run. Pass rush wise, they only got 9 hurries on the quarterback, 1 sack. And I think if you look at Pitt this year, if you've watched them play, you've noticed that Keaton Slovis has really kind of been, on the run. He's been pressured. He's been hit a lot. He was just beaten around in that Tennessee game. If you watch that, even against West Virginia. So it was disappointing that Virginia Tech couldn't get more of a consistent pass rush on the quarterback. It's something they've struggled to do in the last 2 games. Obviously, missing Daquan Bright is not going to help them there, but they've got to be better overall getting to the passer. A getting better category, we'll call it good. We'll call it good for now. The offense actually really didn't play that bad. I think they had over 400 yards of total offense, only their second time going over 300 yards this season against an FBS opponent. It's the highest grade and QBR rating of the year for Grant Wells, and that's any game. That includes Wofford. So that's something to be optimistic about. Caleb Smith had his first career 100-yard receiving game. He did that in the first half. He finished the game with 9 catches for 152 yards. He's definitely the go-to option in this offense. I think somebody I want to see get more involved is Daquan Bright, or Daquan Moore, excuse me. The guy is an absolute stud. He's not on the field a lot. He only played 15 snaps on Saturday, but he had 5 catches for 47 yards. He's one of the highest graded players on the field whenever he is on the field. He's only played 36 snaps this year, but he's played twice in the last 2 games. So he's played against North Carolina, he's played a bit against Pitt. He didn't play before that. I think the reason he's listed as a tight end, he's 6'4", 236. He's a big guy, but he can move. He hasn't been used at all as a pass blocker, and I think that's the reason that we haven't seen him in that starting lineup over Nick Gallo. Gallo is second on the team in receptions, but he's one of the lowest graded players overall from a performance standpoint. So, there's some things there to look at. I think it's super promising from Moore. I definitely want to see him involved more. Dwayne Lofton had a big catch down the field, and that was good to see. And, Virginia Tech definitely tried to take some more shots down the field on Saturday, and it paid off. The ugly, bad, and good, that was special teams. Also adding to that bad line item was penalties. Just continues to plague this team. It's stalling drives, it's killing momentum, it's extending drives for the other team. It is absolutely infuriating to watch a team continue to shoot itself in the foot, and that's what this Virginia Tech team is doing right now. And that's the sign of, that's just one of the leading indicators for why an average football team loses. Why does a team lose close games? Well, a lot of times it's because of things like penalties. And that's what's happening to Virginia Tech right now. Special teams was all over the map. If you take away the block punt for a touchdown, which was great, obviously, it was a poor punting performance overall by Peter Moore. It just couldn't get going for whatever reason. Will Ross missed his first field goal of the year. So it's just kind of, when it rains, it pours on special teams on Saturday. I think, it's probably more of an anomaly than anything else. It's been a pretty solid group all year. So they'll need to play better going forward for the Hokies to, win that field position battle, get those points. You look at the last 2 games, they've just left so many points off of the scoreboard, whether it's because of penalties or miscues, whether that's defensively, offensively, special teams wise. They've got to clean that up. I'd say the best takeaway of the game was Malachi Thomas being back. And he really is kind of what this offense was missing. If you look at him, he's going to be the workhorse back. He's the guy who I think is best suited to run between the tackles. He had 15 carries for 84 yards and a touchdown in his return. He's really the stabilizer the offense needed. I don't think it's a surprise that this was his first game back, and it was the best offensive performance Virginia Tech has had all season. He's the Thunder to King's Lightning. I think Keyshawn King is still going to get a lot of playing time, but he'll probably get about the same amount of touches he was getting as a starter, to be honest. But it'll be a fun tandem. He's definitely the home run threat of the offense, but Thomas is atop the depth chart going into Miami, if that tells you anything. So some of the takeaways: Brad Glenn needs to stay in the booth with Tyler Bowen. If you weren't aware, Glenn was in the booth this past weekend with Bowen. Pry had mentioned that he was going to be up there to help Bowen out with some of the play calling and just game to game, like play to play things that are going on from a game standpoint. And I mean that appeared to pay off. And again, I don't know if it was Malachi Thomas or the opponent or Brad Glenn or Tyler Bowen just being better. Whatever it was, let's just keep doing it. So keep Glenn up there. He's a former offensive coordinator. He can definitely, I think, help guide Bowen, similar to how Pry's guiding Marv on the defensive side. We still don't know to what extent Glenn is, like, what his involvement is up there, but whatever it is, let's keep doing it. Offensive line run blocking. It's pretty bad. Pretty bad. Their second lowest grade of the season. Per the PFF scale, 49.9 is poor. They graded out at a 42.9. Their worst performance, they had a grade of like 35 against Boston College. This group needs to get better. But, I think one reason this group is struggling compared to last year, I think a lot of people have looked at last year's stats and said, well, Silas Zanzi's regressed and Parker Clements has regressed and Johnny Jordan and blah, blah, blah. They really haven't. I think if you look at last year, there was a lot more depth on the offensive line last year. Johnny Jordan, Parker Clements, Silas Zanzi, they didn't play every game. They were backups. Zanzi battled some injuries. He only had 400 and something snaps last year. He's already got that. After this Miami game, he's probably, along with Parker Clements, will surpass last year's total snap count total of the year, playing-wise. Johnny Jordan has already surpassed that number. The only full-time starter returned on this offensive line is Kaden Moore, and he's improved as a pass blocker. He's gone down a little bit as a run blocker, and actually every single offensive lineman has decreased pass against as a run blocker from a grade standpoint. But why is that? Well, if you look at what Vance Weiss did as an offensive line coach, he mixed and matched guys in constantly. He was constantly rotating guys in, but he had depth. You had Luke Tenuta, you had Brock Hoffman, you had a bunch of other guys. And what that allowed you to do was play the matchups. You put guys in where they're best at. And so what we're seeing now is all these guys are playing every game. They're playing almost every single snap. Outside of Braylon Moore, Kaden Moore's brother, outside of Braylon Moore and Bob Schick, no other offensive lineman on the second team has taken a snap. That's it. There have been 7 guys this year to take a snap on the offensive line, and 5 of them have been the full-time starters and have barely come off the field. So what we're seeing is more of who they are as players. And I still think, if you take Silas Zanzi and Johnny Jordan out of it, Parker Clements, he seems to be struggling the most out of everybody. But if you look at Parker Clements, he's still just a redshirt sophomore. These guys need time to develop. And he's being thrown into the fire. He's doing the job, I'm sure, to the best of his ability. I don't think anybody's questioning his work ethic. And it's just going to take time with this group, more than any other group on the field. And I think when you look at the offensive line, that's really what's happening right now. It is probably the youngest positional group of the entire team, especially when you go into that second team depth. Braylon Moore is a true freshman. Bob Schick is a redshirt sophomore. They're the only two guys that have played. And then you've got a bunch of other guys that are either freshmen or redshirt freshmen that haven't played yet because obviously Joe Rudolph is not comfortable putting them in. So if anybody thinks Joe Rudolph is the issue or he's not doing a great job, it's just not the case. There's no depth at this position. And that is why this unit is struggling. What's worse than struggling and then not being able to take somebody out of that situation, to give them a breather, or to put them in a better position to succeed. That is why depth is so important, and that is why the Hokies are struggling on the offensive line. So the hope is they'll get better. I think, there was a really big gap in how the team performed rushing-wise last week, which was good. But from a blocking perspective, there is a big gap to close. And even if Virginia Tech just is average from a run blocking standpoint, we should see massive improvements with how this group is performing. And, you can go back and look at Joe Rudolph and how his offensive lines performed at Wisconsin the last 3, 4, 5 years. They're all at either the above average to good to elite categories. So, like I said, it's going to take time. It's part of the rebuild. This is one of those groups where it's really being kind of, out there for everybody to see where some of the issues are. But again, it's just it's going to take a little bit of time with this group. So that being said, some of the signs for improvement. I think overall Virginia Tech played one of their better games. Obviously, the explosive plays on defense can't happen. It was not a great game defensively if you look at it. I thought in coverage they were actually pretty good. They held Pitt within check for the most part, even without Dorian Strong, their best corner. So that was good. But Pitt came in, they wanted to run the football, and that's what they did, 36 times. And again, they had 7 plays of 16 yards or more. It's 6 rushing touchdowns, school record 320 yards on the ground by Abanaconda. So that's tough to win. You're not going to win games like that. But Grant Wells, best game as a Hokie, literally, no matter where you look, box score, QBR rating, PFF grade, it is his best game as a Virginia Tech quarterback. What can't be promising about that? Malachi Thomas is back. I think, you start to see some of these offensive guys emerge, like Daquan Moore, like I mentioned. Dwayne Lofton had a big play down the field. Caleb Smith is still obviously the go-to option there, and has just been playing great. I mean, I think, Caleb Smith was obviously the number one coming into the season, but can't emphasize enough how good he has been this year. So they just need to keep grinding, and hopefully they can start eliminating these mistakes that are really setting them back, and that will give them a better chance to win. So let's look at the Miami game. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of big games this weekend. You've got Tennessee, Alabama. It's a top 5-ish, top 6-ish matchup. Tennessee's wearing orange helmets for the first time since 1939. The last time they wore those, they beat Alabama 21-0. So I thought that was a fun little, nod to history there. You've got Penn State, Michigan. Unfortunately, this game, it usually does draw eyes, does draw attention. It's the 40th meeting all time. It's homecoming. It's the Maroon Effect game, or Maroon Effect. It's the first time in those 40 meetings that both teams have had a losing record. And it wasn't long ago that this was must-see TV. I think both of these programs, they have new coaches. There's some talent there, obviously, more on the Miami side. But as we have seen over the years, both of these teams came into the ACC at the same time, and Virginia Tech has 4 ACC championships. Miami has none. And I would guarantee you, on every single one of those teams, Miami was considered to have more talent than Virginia Tech. So talent is what it is. It's all about coaching. It's all about doing what you can with what you have. And Virginia Tech's been better about that over time. But here we are. It's present day. History is history. Neither one of these teams is very good right now. They're both coming in on a 3-game losing streak. It's the 3rd time since 2019 that Miami has started 2-3. And one thing about Miami is, I think some of their numbers can pop off the page at you, but they haven't held a lead since beating Southern Miss. So that's 3 games they haven't held a lead at all. And, if you take away their Bethune-Cookman 70-13 win, uh, they really haven't been like super great. Those numbers obviously popped off the page, and I think they influenced the statistics a little bit. But all in all, 3 straight losses for each of these teams. If you look at Miami, they had a road matchup against A&M. They played okay in that game, lost 17-9. Again, A&M is kind of a disaster right now too. Then they lose the following week to Middle Tennessee, 45-31, just a complete shocker. And then came off of last week's loss to UNC, got down, had a little bit of a comeback there, but lost 27-24. So overall, averaging 32.8 points per game. They've got 21.8 points against them is what they're giving up defensively. Through the air, they're averaging 262, 102 on the ground. So, they haven't been able to run the ball well. Defensively, 59th overall, they're allowing 364 yards per game. Virginia Tech offensively ranks 111th in the country. Red zone offense has been a struggle for Miami, 73rd. However, that's been one of Virginia Tech's biggest deficiencies defensively is red zone defense. They rank 112th in the FBS. So that's going to be something to watch. Like I said, with the strength of schedule, Miami's strength of schedule is 100. They haven't played a super strong schedule, and they're 2-3. So they rank 22nd in total offense, 15th in passing, 69th in rushing. But like I said, they put up 70 against Bethune-Cookman. They've only averaged 51 yards rushing in their last 2 games. And somehow they're still 69th in rushing. So they're not a good rushing football team at the moment. They benched their quarterback a game and a half ago. And that was against Middle Tennessee in the loss. He obviously had a big day last week, Tyler Van Dyke, that is, threw for 496 yards against North Carolina. As we highlighted a couple weeks ago, our disappointment with how Virginia Tech performed against North Carolina, because defensively they're basically just, an open book. They can't stop much of a nosebleed unless, they're playing Virginia Tech. But total defense-wise, Hokies, they continue to drop, I think, back to the mean, back to where we thought they would be. Right now they're 37th in total defense. They're giving up 341 yards per game. So that's just basically by the numbers to give you kind of a quick idea of everything that's going on there. Injury-wise, Miami's been battling the injury bug a bit. Lost their backup tight end, I should say. Lost their starting right guard last week. They've been battling some injuries on the offensive line, but mostly everybody's intact. They've had some guys come back as well. So I think quarterback-wise, Van Dyke, it's interesting because he was one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC last year. I think everybody's pick for the top quarterback returning in the ACC this year. And it's not a trend like we're not seeing across the ACC. You could say the same for Brennan Armstrong at UVA, Phil Dracovic, Devin Leary. All those guys have taken step backs this year. But he is coming off a big performance against North Carolina. The game prior, which was against Middle Tennessee, 16 for 32, 138 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, was benched in that game. One thing that Van Dyke pointed out is they had the bye week before playing North Carolina. He mentioned that he worked with the offensive staff to condense the playbook and focus on plays that he was most comfortable with going into that UNC game. And I think what we saw was a much improved offensive performance from the Miami team in the passing game. He had 14 pass plays over 15 yards against Carolina. So definitely something to watch. Are they hitting their stride? Was it just right timing against a bad defense? Virginia Tech has, some game tape on that limited playbook that they can look at. So we'll see how that plays out against the Hokies this week. Rushing wise, I think it's obviously going to be something that everybody's watching for, right? Abanaconda's 320 yards. Miami just doesn't have a big running game. Last week Parrish had 19 yards on 11 carries. He's only gone over 100 yards twice, both of those against Bethune-Cookman and Southern Miss. Overall, the team had 41 yards rushing on 23 carries against Carolina, who ranks 106th against the run. So we'll see kind of what happens there. And defensively, they've been kind of a mixed bag. I mean, they held that Drake May-led UNC offense in check in the second half, which should give Virginia Tech fans some concern about what the Virginia Tech offense can do. Only allowed 2 field goals after halftime. They intercepted him twice, held the run game in check for the most part, did give up 161 yards, but again, 43 attempts. And they were able to sack May 5 times. So they were able to get after the quarterback, and I think that's probably what led to less of a offensive output there in the second half. But they've also been very vulnerable to big plays in the pass game. They've given, like, if you look at Middle Tennessee, they allowed 3 passes that one went for 98, one went for 89, and one went for 69. And then tackling on top of it has been probably their biggest weakness defensively. They're a below average tackling team that can have really bad days. They had a really bad day against Middle Tennessee. So we'll kind of keep those things in mind. We'll see how it goes. But keys to the game for Virginia Tech to beat Miami, or at least have a chance. The pass rush, which we talked about earlier against Pitt, that is missing. It's really been missing for 2 weeks. Especially with Van Dyke back there. I don't care what kind of season Van Dyke has had. We know he's a talented quarterback. He's coming off his best performance of the season. You're likely not going to have Dorian Strong again for the 3rd straight game, who is your best cornerback. So this defensive line needs to figure out how to get after the quarterback. Linebackers back. We've got Alan Tisdale returning from a eligibility issue, so he's making a season debut. He's atop the linebacker chart at will. So I think that's a good boost. So we'll see what happens. Garbage should be back as well. So hopefully the Hokies are a little bit better at offensive line, or at that offensive pass rush. But the offensive line for Miami is pretty solid. It's not the offensive line that we had seen Miami have over the last, few years. Explosive plays, again, I don't want to continue to beat the dead bush, but you gave up 9 passes over 20 yards against North Carolina. You gave up 7 carries over 16 yards against Pitt. You cannot do that against Miami and expect to win. If Miami comes out and runs the football down Virginia Tech's throat, I just don't know what to say. They've been unable to run the football this year. So I really hope that's not what happens. I would expect there to be a big play or 2 in the pass game. I think that would be more acceptable. But they just have to limit what happens and make sure that they're not scoring touchdowns. I think that's the biggest thing. And then offensively, the biggest key is to establish the run and control the clock. And I think, statistically, Miami's been good against the run. I also think teams have focused more on the pass against Miami because they've been more vulnerable in that aspect of their defense. But Virginia Tech will and should try to establish the run game. They've got Malachi Thomas back. They've got Keyshawn King. Utilize that 1-2 punch, see what you can get going. And I think that's the key to winning the game, possessing the ball, keeping the defense off the field, and it should open up some bigger plays down the field, which I do think Virginia Tech needs to take a few shots to keep this Miami secondary kind of in check. So we'll see what happens there. Those are my keys. My prediction, did check with Tim to see kind of what he thought. He told me Virginia Tech wins. I think Tim is very intent on Virginia Tech winning, even though it hasn't really been done the last few weeks. The spread is Miami -7. I'm going to take Miami to cover, Virginia Tech to cover, but I'm going to take them to lose the game. I feel like 31-27 feels like the right score. The things I'm watching for the most are discipline, reducing penalties, consistent tackling performance, limited explosive play rate, establish the run. The Hokies probably win if they can do all those things, but that's a lot of things that have to go right that have been going wrong for Virginia Tech recently. So it's an important game for the Hokies. They have to have this one heading into a bye week, followed by a road Thursday night matchup against NC State. And then you've got matchups against Georgia Tech and Duke coming up after that. So it's always good to head into a bye with some momentum. It'd put them at 3-4, 2-2 in the conference, with a shot in the dark at winning the Coastal, although that's very unlikely at this point. But it'd be nice to see the Hokies have some hope heading into the final 5 games of the season. So that's what I've got. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about Virginia Tech and where the football's at. You can head over to chowderandgrits.com and check out what we got going on over there. YouTube, if you want to watch this on YouTube, we've got a YouTube channel, so just click like, subscribe. And other than that, go Hokies, and see you guys next week.